Hello, and welcome to another in a series of panel discussions sponsored by Indivisible South Bay. These discussions are meant to explore the many ways in which we at Indivisible South Bay are coping with the results of the 2016 election. Our discussion this time will be with special guests from Sister District. My name is Eitan Fenson. I've been a tech startup engineer, entrepreneur, and executive here in Silicon Valley for 30 years. For much of that time, I've also been an activist for social and economic justice. On my right is Rita Bosworth, founder and executive director of Sister District Project. She grew up in the South Bay, went to college at UC Davis, and to law school at Stanford. Rita worked as a federal public defender for 12 years and started Sister District from her living room a week after the election. Rita left her job at the public defender in July to run Sister District full-time. This must be quite the challenge, as Rita has twin 3-year-old boys. Sitting next to Rita is Jonte Craighead. He's a district captain of the San Francisco chapter of Sister District, who helps direct recruitment and liaison activities for the chapter. Jonte is a native of rural Virginia, works as a product manager, and moved to San Francisco 4 years ago. Prior to November, Jonte had never been involved in politics, but joined Sister District to connect voters at home and places like home with candidates with real solutions to their problems. With the San Francisco chapter, Jonte helps direct recruitment and liaison activities, and in August he visited and canvassed with the Guzman campaign, one of 2 Virginia candidates the San Francisco chapter is supporting in the House of Delegates races. As always, if this show makes you want to get out of your chair, join with your friends, and act to make positive progressive change, then we will have accomplished something. Now to Sister District. Rita, can you tell us more about yourself, how you came to found Sister District, and what its mission is?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us on the show. As you said, I am an attorney. I've been a public defender for 12 years. I haven't actually been involved in politics or campaigns all that much, but when the 2016 election happened, I felt a call to action, and there were several things I found troubling about that election, like many of you, I think. First and foremost was that the Democrats won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, and yet the person who's in office right now is somebody that only the minority of our population voted for. And that's troubling on a really fundamental level. We as Americans really value fairness and equality and equal representation and one person, one vote. Those things didn't happen in the 2016 election, and that's troubling. Another observation that I made living in California is that we here in California were choosing between 2 Democrats for our open Senate seat because of our open primary. So no matter what, a Democrat was going to be sent to the Senate, and yet $20 million was spent on that race to determine which Democrat, which electorally would make no difference for the Democrats, but to determine which Democrat was going to go to the Senate. And I thought to myself, what if we spent $20 million on races across the country that matter? And I live in a deep blue district. You know, I can phone bank or canvass for my representative, but she doesn't really need me to. It's going to be a blue district. So what I'd like to do is phone bank or canvass or donate or fundraise to a candidate somewhere across the country where it's actually going to make a difference for Democrats. And so that was the idea behind Sister District. I know a lot of people are frustrated living in deep blue or even deep red districts where they feel like their voice doesn't matter, they can't make a change. And at Sister District, we identify candidates, and specifically state-level candidates, where the candidate is in a competitive election and they need a boost. And we organize on the ground and we channel volunteer resources to those elections to get those candidates elected.
Interesting. Why the focus on state legislature races as opposed to national races?
It's a great question. And I will say that when I started Sister District, when I had the idea, my initial thought was that we should flip Congress. And we should flip Congress. But my belief is that the way we flip Congress in a long-term, sustained, strategic manner is we have to win back the states. And the reason for that is that the states control redistricting. And so whichever party is in power in the states gets to, for the most part, determine how to draw the voting lines. Now, there are some states that have independent voting commissions, independent redistricting commissions, but for the most part, it's the party in power. And they engage in a practice called gerrymandering, where they draw the district lines in really funny geographic shapes that don't really match up with any sort of geography, but they just give the advantage to the party in power. And we end up with, and I'll give you a couple of examples, we end up with situations where, for example, in North Carolina, that's a state that goes pretty much 50-50 for Democrat, Republican. They went for Trump, but they elected a Democratic governor. 10 of their congressional seats belong to Republicans, and only 3 belong to Democrats.
Wow.
And you look at a state like Virginia, which we'll talk about, I think, a little bit later, which Sister District is supporting races in Virginia. That's a state that went for the Democratic presidential candidate the past 3 election cycles, and yet 66 of their 100 seats in their House of Delegates belong to Republicans.
Wow.
And you look at Wisconsin, which has a case pending in the Supreme Court next month. That's a state where in 2011, about 48% of their votes went to Republicans, and yet 66 of 99 of their seats go Republican. So we see this gerrymandering practice is rampant. And what happened was when President Obama was elected in 2008, the Republicans very smartly decided to invest in states. They spent about $30 million to win back state legislatures. And as they gained power, they drew the lines to favor themselves. And now we see many, many scenarios where the majority of voters are Democrats and yet Republicans are maintaining power. And that's happening both in the states and in Congress. So the way I see it, we have 2 choices. Congressional elections happen every 2 years. So we can either spend millions and millions and millions of dollars every 2 years for the congressional races, the way that they're drawn, which is an uphill battle for us because the system really is rigged against Democrats right now. Or we can invest in states, initiate fairer redistricting, have the lines drawn in a fairer manner. We will just get congressional seats without having to spend millions of dollars on them, and we're going to end up with a more representative democracy.
Interesting. You talk about gerrymandering. The name gerrymandering comes from a politician whose name was Jerry, and he was particularly good at defining geography of districts to be in the interest of his party. And the name gerrymandering comes from the districts looking like salamanders. But to that end, you mentioned the Supreme Court case that's going to be argued by at the court in October, at least in the session starting in October. And this is a Wisconsin gerrymandering case, and the court has already said that if they could see proof that the gerrymandering was done for partisan purposes, that they would actually strike it down as being unconstitutional. And that, to my mind, indicates some hope that maybe there will be relief from the Supreme Court. What do you think?
Well, I practiced in federal court for 12 years as a federal defender, and one thing I learned about the Supreme Court is, number one, you can never count on what they're going to do. So while I think we can have some hope, I'm not too optimistic that they will do what we want them to do. They've never said that partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional yet. But the other thing about the Supreme Court is that change comes very slowly. So consider the Wisconsin case that's in front of the court. They are litigating maps that were drawn in 2011 after the census. It's now 2017. So it's been 6 years that these maps have been in place, and it's finally gotten up to the Supreme Court. Wow. But in those 6 years, Democrats have lost 23 state houses, we've lost governorships, we've lost seats in Congress, we've lost power on every level of government, and not just in Wisconsin, but all over the place, because it's an issue of time. And so even if the court does what we think they should do, which is strike down this map, and I certainly hope they do, but even if they do, it's going to take time, because what happens is then the case gets remanded down to the district level, the party in power redraws the maps, and that's still the Republicans, and then we start the process all over. So while we should hope that they do the right thing here, that is not the solution. And so that doesn't change our strategy at all. We really have to go in and win elections so that we can take control, and in a democratic matter, not just with a court on high making this decision. This is something that belongs to the people, and we should own it, and that's why we need to go in and win the elections.
Yeah, you made the case in earlier discussions about Brown versus Board of Education as having happened 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago, and yet we still don't have completely desegregated school systems. So that's a very good point. Okay, now, Jonte, I know you're focused on Virginia. Can you describe what's happening on the ground there?
Yeah, what's happening on the ground there, to some degree, is greatly influencing what's happening on the ground here in the Bay Area and San Francisco, where I'm a district captain. And it's been a real education, and it's actually quite empowering to, be involved with the Sister District project, because we spent, since June when we got our assignments, I joined Sister District project again with no experience back in March. From June on, we've been learning about this particular area of Virginia in and around Prince William County, one of the most diverse counties in Virginia, but one that's divided up into 8 pieces. Only 6 pieces of which are represented, 6 pieces of which are represented by Republicans, and only 2 of which are represented by Democrats. So in 2 of those 6 that are represented by Republicans, there's a lot of energy there about, taking back the House of Delegates in Virginia.
Yeah.
There are 17 districts that went for Hillary in the last election, but are represented by Republicans. And, a lot of the organizing that we did and planning that we did leading up to this election that's coming up in November 2017, not 2018,
Right,
November 2017, has been really exciting. I got to visit there in August to actually meet with one of the candidates, Elizabeth Guzman. And I can tell you, the research and even hearing her speak on video is nothing like getting to see her talk with passion about the family-related issues that she's focused on, about making sure that families have time, at home with their kids, focused on things that actually matter, like education and healthcare, not on whether security guards in schools should be armed with a weapon.
Right. Yeah.
Which is what her opponent is really after.
Right. Cool. Rita, can you give us a bit of a strategic overview of what you foresee for Sister District for the coming year?
Sure. So as Jonte mentioned, a lot of the races we're supporting this year are in Virginia, and that's largely because those are the races that are happening. Election work is really cyclical, and so you go to what's happening. And Virginia is one of the few states that has their state elections in the off years. So Virginia is having elections. All 100 of their seats in the House of Delegates are up for re-election. As Jonte mentioned, there are actually 51 out of those 100 seats are districts that Hillary Clinton won. So if we win 17 seats, then we would flip the chamber. Another state that we're in right now is Washington State. They are having a special election for one of their Senate seats. And this is a really exciting race because whichever candidate wins that election, that candidate's party is going to control the Senate chamber in Washington. And so we're supporting a wonderful candidate, Manka Dhingra, and if she wins, not only will the Democrats take the Senate, but Washington State will turn into a trifecta state for the Democrats. And what that means is that the same party controls the governorship and both branches of state government. Now, the Democrats, as I just mentioned, have 6 trifectas. The Republicans have 26.
Wow.
And this is largely because of that investment they made in state legislatures, but that is also why we are just seeing horrific legislation coming out on immigration and reproductive rights and transgender rights and all of these issues, because when you have unilateral control of a state, then you can just produce these things. And the thing about state races is that states are incubators for legislation that eventually becomes national policy. And so going back to the point of why states are important, they control redistricting, and that's very important, but they also create policy that we see bubbling up to the national level, and they're creating the pipeline of candidates. And so we have to support good state candidates to get the good national candidates. And so this race in Washington State is really very important for the Democrats. If we flip the Senate and we create our trifecta in Washington, we can have a big blue wall on the west coast of Washington, Oregon, and California. And then we're going to move from there. At Sister District, we have about 25,000 volunteers across the country. We're very proud of our volunteers. They're organizing on the ground, working really hard. But it's still a fairly small organization, and we only want to support the number of races that we can where we can move the needle. And one great thing about Sister District and the actions that we take is that we coordinate directly with the campaigns. And so we reach out to the campaigns, we vet the candidates, we ask them exactly what action items they need, and then we can tell our volunteers specifically what they need to do to help these candidates. And so it's really efficient for our volunteers. They're able to take action items that make a difference and are tangible, and we can see the results. We've raised a big chunk of the budgets for some of our candidates because their budgets are smaller. And so your $20 for a state candidate goes a lot further than your $20 for a congressional or a Senate candidate. But we do hope to, in 2018, grow our organization and expand, and there will be a lot more states having races next year in 2018. And again, we look for those races that are targeted, where we can get a win not only for a Democrat, but for the Democrats in terms of flipping a chamber, busting a Republican supermajority, adding a Democratic trifecta state, or reducing a Republican trifecta states. There are strategic goals that we look for when we're choosing which races to support. And so we will continue on that path to try to make that strategic, long-term, sustained change.
Well, that's great. It occurs to me that you haven't tooted your own horn. It turns out that there was a big success earlier this year in Delaware, and you pointed out the Washington race. The victor of this one race determined the majority party in the Senate. The same was true in Delaware. And just tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. That was such an exciting race. It was our first race. It was in February of this year. And we certainly can't take all the credit because a lot of really dedicated groups were working in that race. But Stephanie Hansen, first and foremost, was an excellent candidate. She was great on the issues, and she cared about the things that the voters in Delaware care about, which is really the most important thing. And we supported her. We teamed up with Flippable, another organization that is supporting state-level races. And together we raised about a third of her campaign budget, which was just really phenomenal. And you know, her seat was won 2 years ago by a candidate by about 350 votes. It was a very tight margin, about 1%. Stephanie won by 17% in record turnout for a special election. And I really do attribute that to the support that she got, the dedication of her volunteers. We had volunteers who drove down all the way from New York to knock on doors for her. We had people all over the country that were taking action items for her. And so it was a great success. And now she is an elected representative. The Senate is blue, and she is already making progressive legislation happen.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Cool. Jonte, can you give us one or two anecdotes that give us a sense of what it's like to be a sister district volunteer?
Yeah, it is fun to be a sister district volunteer, I've got to tell you. It's also a place for many firsts. I told you already about my visit to Virginia. That was the first time I had ever gone canvassing before, ever knocked on strangers' doors to talk to voters. But you don't have to go to Virginia to make an impact, and that's the whole idea. I'm working with my neighbors in the Mission District as the captain there to gain skills in phone banking. That's another first. I had never phone banked before. I did that for the first time last month. We organize house parties. You get your friends together, and you give a spiel, invite one of the district captains, or come up with your own pitch and talk about the candidate, why it matters. Have a few people for drinks or dinner or a fun activity around the house, and that goes a long way. We raised $15,000 for our first candidate, one of the two, the other candidate, Lee Carter, back in June. Basically a month and a half worth of work. And that went so far for his campaign. It allowed him to have enough money to run polling. Wow. Which is really important for crafting his message and competing with someone who is the, majority whip in the House of Delegates there. So all of these things taken together, because Rita and the other sister district co-founders invested their time, I was able to invest my time as a district captain so that our volunteers can invest their time to connect all of their friends together with this one campaign and all of the voters that are in Virginia who really want another option. So it's given me an opportunity to, say this government thing is something that I can be a part of in a really meaningful way.
That's fabulous. That's really great. Rita, it's clear that Sister District is doing important and successful work. On that note, can you let our viewers know what they can do to be part of the Sister District action?
Absolutely. So the first thing is to go to our website at sisterdistrict.com. You enter your email and your zip code, and that allows us to put you in the team that is closest to where you live. And so once you have signed up, you'll get contacted by the district captain, like Jante, who lives in your area, and you will begin to be invited to events. You'll be on the mailing list for your local team and also for national, and we don't send too many emails, so don't worry about that. And then really the great thing about it is that you can be as involved as you want to be. So at the very least, you can get our emails and read our messages and hear what we have to say. The way that we assign elections is that we actually assign specific races to specific teams. So for example, Jante's team in San Francisco, they have 2 of the races that we're supporting. We don't want to say, hey volunteers, we have 75 races, you should all support all of them. We're really trying to avoid election fatigue, give people specific people they can support and communities they can connect with. And I think that really helps them develop a relationship and a devotion to the actions. And then there are just a variety of action items you can take. So it can be as benign as sharing and liking on social media. These candidates need that. These state campaigns are very small, and they don't have these just hundreds or thousands of followers. And so a few likes or follows can actually really give them a boost. You can do phone banking, or we have postcard programs, writing postcards to the voters in Virginia to remind them to vote. We are working on implementing some text banking programs. Fundraisers, our volunteers have come up with the most amazing fundraisers. We have a wonderfully active team in southern Vermont, and they have started a soup subscription, and they make soup. They have a Move Left minestrone, and they sell subscriptions, and that money goes to support their candidate. And there's things like that in LA this weekend. They had a bake sale for their candidates, and so we're seeing this creativity just bursting through, and it's so amazing because people are having fun and they're engaging, and they keep coming back to do more things. And really it's a way to build and be a part of a community and find other people that care about these things that you care about. And so you can be as little or as hugely involved as you want. I mean, Jante, of course, made the big trip to Virginia and canvassed, and we actually have a lot of folks that are going to canvass in Virginia and Washington, and so people are dedicated, but there's something for everyone. And most importantly, it's just that we spread the word about the importance of state races and about how everybody can get involved, everybody makes a difference.
Well, that's cool. You know, as I listen to you, I realize that those of us who are more involved in leadership, in activism, we spend a lot of time doing this, and that can be intimidating. So what you've just described sounds really cool. But let's ask, Jante, how many hours a week does it take for you to do all the cool stuff you're doing?
I spend maybe 5 hours a week, but we have volunteers who come to our monthly meetings, spend an hour doing postcarding activities, or an hour on the weekend to do phone banking, or put together a house party that they would be having anyway. So lots of different opportunities to be involved.
That's really cool. Well, another thing that really struck me, when you were talking about coordination with the candidates, it seems to me that from what I've heard about Sister District and what you've told me, you guys really have done your homework in setting up an infrastructure that supports the optimal use of resources to get positive results from elections. And certainly the Delaware result is a good example of that, and I fully expect and hope and expect that Virginia will be the same, and Washington. So that's a very impressive element of the way that Sister District is managed. But it strikes me also that right now there's a lot of activity as we prepare for a November election. We're in September, soon to be October. This is really the height of activity. I imagine, having been associated with campaigns, that come November, there'll be a little bit of okay, now it's time to breathe a sigh of relief and maybe go on and do other things. How do you maintain the momentum going forward, particularly looking into 2018, ramping back up again for the election then?
That's a great question, and one we think about a lot because we know that this year, Virginia and Washington are really the only games in town, and so we're getting a lot of attention. But next year, of course, not only will more states be having elections, but of course all of our congressional seats will be up for election. So I think there's a couple of things. Number one is these are not mutually exclusive. You can work on state races and also congressional races or other special elections. And in fact, next year when there are congressional races, a lot of our districts are probably going to overlap with the controversial congressional races. And so there's going to be a lot of whole ticket work, and we're going to be working with other groups, hopefully, who are working on congressional races to make sure that people are voting all up and down the ticket the way that they should be. But another thing that we encourage our members to do is to partner with Indivisible groups and other activist groups, local Democratic Party, because our work is cyclical and the elections happen at a certain time of year, but member of Congress work can happen on those off times. And so we think there's a lot of room for collaboration and working together. We really have no ego about this. We all are looking towards the same result here, and we are very in favor of forming partnerships and working together toward our common goal.
Well, I know we at Indivisible look forward to that partnership, and we feel as if we've already started on that. Well, this concludes our discussion with Rita Bosworth and Jonte Craighead, who have introduced us to Sister District Project, one of the shining lights of the resistance that was spawned by a very troubling 2016 election. Thanks to both of you, Rita and Jonte, for sharing your very upbeat and inspiring story. I encourage all of us in Indivisible, Swing Left, the Democratic Party, etc., to make time to join Rita and Jonte in forward-looking and strategic Sister District Project.